events. Join us in celebration of our appreciation at our studio on December 19th at 7:30.
And the salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, looking for an approval of the order of agenda. Commissioner Niblin?
I'll move approval of the order of agenda.
Commissioner Big Stick?
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. Moving on to approval of the minutes. Commissioner Berman?
I move that we approve the minutes from November 18th, 2019.
Commissioner Niblin?
I will second Commissioner Berman's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. And it looks like we need to designate a liaison for the meeting, City Council meeting of 1/13/2020 for the ADU ordinance.
That's correct. For now, we would like to designate a liaison for January 13th. The city manager may shift the hearing date for that item to the second meeting in January, but we don't know the resolution of the scheduling right now. We'd like to set a liaison just to be covered. We will have another opportunity at the Planning Commission meeting to second meeting in January to appoint a liaison to the second meeting if necessary.
Okay. Commissioner Big Stick?
I'll definitely be free that night and able to, if nobody else has a burning desire to be liaison on ADUs.
Okay, so we'll say that Commissioner Big Stick is going to be the liaison at this point in time. Now we're going to move on to oral communications. This portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. Is there anybody who would like to speak tonight? If you could come up and speak, make sure you say your name clearly, and when you're done, fill out a card and make sure that staff gets it.
Thank you for, I guess, taking my question. I have a question. I'm not sure if that's an acceptable approach. The second item of the evening about the dwelling units.
If you're going to talk about that item, if you could wait until that item comes up.
Sure.
All right, thank you. And you go ahead and fill out a card now so that you'd be ready then. All right, anybody else for oral communications? And this is for things that are not on tonight's agenda. And I'm not seeing anyone, so we'll move on to the next order of business, which is a new public hearing. Site development permit PSD 841-19 to construct a new 3,128 square foot, three-story single-family residence with a 400 square foot two-car detached garage on an undeveloped 39,040 square foot non-conforming lot. Staff, can we have a report, please?
Pardon me, through the chair, before we begin, brief disclosure, when I went down to the lot earlier just to take a look, Mike O'Connell, the applicant, happened to be there also. Since we coincided, utterly unplanned. I took the opportunity to ask a couple clarifying questions, but in no way, shape, or form influenced how I will vote tonight. I wanted to make that clear ahead of time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Big Stick. Staff report, please.
Good evening. This is Ranu Agarwal, contract planner. The project before you today proposes construction of a new 3,128 square foot, 3-story single-family residence with a 400 square foot detached garage on a vacant site on Higgins Way in Lindamar neighborhood. The site is in B5 lot size overlay zoning district and is non-conforming with respect to size. So the project requires a site development permit as it proposes a building which does not meet the height standard for non-conforming lots. The site also incorporates 2 general plan designations, the low-density residential designation and open space residential designation. The LDR designation is on the western portion of the site, and the OSR designation is on the eastern portion of the site. The project is located in the LDR portion of the site. According to staff analysis, the development in the ADR designated area in the vicinity and the proposed development of the site indicate that the development of the subject project in the area would remain consistent with the density standards of the LDR designation, which is 3 to 9 dwelling units per acres. This analysis is included in the agenda packet on page 24 to 25. The project site carries a slope of 55% from Higgins Way downward to the north to the rear of the property. And influenced by the steep slope of the site, the project proposes terracing in improvements. The residence is 3 stories by itself with main exterior access at the 3rd story, and step retaining walls to the north and the east of the building are proposed to minimize grading. The project also proposes improvements to extend Higgins Way to a distance of approximately 66 feet beyond the current edge of the improved street near the western boundary of the property. These improvements will include a 28-foot, 6-inch wide roadway, which along with the project's driveway will provide emergency vehicle turnaround and space for a car to back up out of the driveway. The approval of this road section, which is less than the required space for a compliant fire truck around, is subject to requirements for signage and marking as required by the California Fire Code, which are included in the project's conditions of approval. Additionally, the project proposes removal of 13 eucalyptus trees, which would contribute to thinning of the dense tree cover on site. So the project proposes 12 replacement trees, which are coast live oak trees, on the site to maintain the tree cover on the to compensate for the loss of the tree cover. In staff assessment, as conditioned, the project meets the required findings for site development permit. It is exempt from California Environmental Quality Act. These discussions are provided in the staff report. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the project as conditioned.
Do we have any questions for staff? Commissioner Campbell?
Was there anything in the plan history as to why this is B5 zoning up in this area?
I've not come across anything in the record. It's been zoned that way for quite some time, many decades. We typically find the B5 lot size overlay, which requires a minimum 1 acre lot size in a couple different applications. One is where larger lot sizes are desired for quasi-agricultural, larger lot type development. The other is in hillside locations. This one I think would be more likely to have been zoned because of the hillside, requiring a larger lot size. That would be my assessment, but I don't have any information from the record to support that.
Okay, I was wondering, sometimes I've seen that it's a trade-off for the development that occurred adjacent sometimes where there's some agreement in the ancient history where the developer said, okay, I'm going to develop all these lots down here, but I'm going to put some big different lots up there, and that's going to be like a trade-off that was agreed to in the past, but nothing like that in the record.
There's nothing that we came across. This site was not previously subdivided as part of a map, so there's no indication that it was a trade-off for other lots in that subdivision map, for example. Similarly, we haven't found anything in the title report to suggest there may have been an open space or other kind of deed restriction that should have set this aside in a particular way.
Okay, thank you. That was exactly what I was wondering.
Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. I actually had a question that I think probably most people know. I don't, though, just because of my lack of experience. What is lap siding specifically? I'm assuming it's some form of, architectural materials, but what is lap siding?
Yeah. It's horizontal siding, which is laid one on top of the other, so it kind of overlaps a little bit.
I see, thank you. And just a couple of other questions then. Regarding the replacement trees, I'm all for removal of the eucalyptus trees. I think that's fine. And then it looks like there's a kind of one-to-one replacement. I'm curious about, one, how big are the replacement trees? How many gallons are the replacement trees?
We would expect them to be 15 gallons, but that was not necessarily specified in the report.
And then just sort of the notion of one-for-one replacement. I've seen reports, here and in other places where sometimes we get a little bit of a greater ratio than one-for-one to account for the fact that sometimes the trees don't take. So I'm curious about, sort of the decision on one-to-one. It's probably fine, but I'm sort of curious about the thinking that goes into that and whether or not maybe a different ratio would be within our discretion.
We hadn't actually specified one-to-one ratio because eucalyptus tree removal is not something that is regulated by the heritage tree ordinance. So this was a proposal that the applicant had presented, and it seemed acceptable to replace it with one-to-one.
Yeah, I think it may be partially coincidental why it ended up being one-to-one. We did seek an expert landscape designer's input on the appropriate number of trees to be planted.
Okay.
And so it's not an arbitrary number. We asked for that individual's expert opinion, and that was the replanting schedule that was provided. I think it's within the commission's discretion, if you're concerned about survivability, to impose some sort of performance standard as part of the replanting, to be monitored after a year or 3 years or whatever period of time the commission may feel is appropriate. Similarly, I think it would be appropriate to specify a minimum planting size as well for the replacement trees.
Okay. So to clarify then, the 12 number actually comes from input received by landscape professionals who are of the view that 12 is kind of the right number. So then it just becomes a question of kind of ensuring we ultimately end up with 12.
That's correct. So I would just say, in learning from the experience of the last time this project was heard, it was a decision made on the dais, I think, to require a one-to-one replanting. For the particular species that was indicated, the coast live oak, we learned in the review of this project that was maybe not the right outcome given the number of trees that were removed in that project. Since then, trees have been removed but not replaced with replanting, and so in light of the new information, we asked for the updated assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got a question in terms of the oak. Is that actually the best choice? I know that there's a oak sudden death thing that's been going on in California for quite some time. Are these oaks less prone to have that happen to them?
The landscape plan was prepared by a landscape designer, and their credentials were what the plan was kind of based on. So we depended on the landscape designer's expert opinion in terms of what species would be the best for this location.
Okay.
Normally coast live oaks
is the landscape person here today? No? Okay, because I am concerned about oaks when we've had this ongoing problem in California with oaks dying. And I'd hate to see us, have a bunch of trees put in and they all die just because of this disease going around. So it may be, we may want to, if they fail, we may want to have a backup species.
Well, I think there's language in the landscaping plan that the applicant shall install and maintain the indicated landscaping in a healthful condition. So I think that condition may go some way towards your concern about long-term survivability, if any pest or infestation were to affect the tree's health and cause them to be removed. They would still need to replant in accordance with the landscaping plan on a permanent basis if this project is approved.
But once the project is approved and built, then it falls to somebody else who buys it. And that's where my concern comes in, is that we could wind up having somebody who buys this with a bunch of oak trees that then die, and then we have no trees.
I suppose that's an outcome, but the conditions of approval, if this is approved, would require that to be replanted and maintained.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a quick question, clarification. Since the removal of the eucalyptus trees, they are obviously an invasive species, non-native. So according to our regulations, the applicant is required to replace those 12 trees, even though they are non-native.
No, the trees are not required to be replaced. They're not heritage trees,
Right.
which can often result in a replacement plan. These are being replanted, I think, out of an abundance of caution due to the slope and the visual impacts that could result if there's no trees replanted on this slope.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions for staff? Not seeing any. I'm going to ask the applicant to come up.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Mike O'Connell. I'm actually the agent for the applicant. I was the applicant a couple years back when the previous iteration was approved. But here tonight, I'm representing the applicant as their agent. So I wanted to give you a little bit of history on what happened with the project and why it stalled. The applicant had started work. They had started some tree removal. There was some grading that was completed to facilitate access to the trees and removal of them. And I think they got in with a couple of tree companies that weren't quite well equipped for such a large tree job. And that went on for about 6 months. I think they actually went through 3 different tree companies before they found the right person. And if you don't get a building inspection within 6 months of pulling your permit, the permit expires. So because the first 6 months of work was stumbling through the tree removal and trying to find the right tree contractor, there were no inspections, and that's why the permit expired. As a result, we're here reapplying for the entitlement tonight. The plan in front of you is largely the same as what was approved in 2016. I know that a few of you were on the commission at that time and might remember the project. The big changes are, at the time in 2016, all of the eucalyptus trees were going to be removed, and the landscaping plan was more of a hillside restoration. The trees are, turns out are very expensive to remove all of them, and so that part of the plan has been scaled back, and it's really just the trees that conflict with the building footprint and, the view to the north, and, maybe within 30 feet of the building envelope. So the landscape plan was adjusted as a result of that. I just wanted to touch on the tree species. I haven't heard of this issue with the oak trees. I know I've got a couple of them planted in my yard. I've got some of them on my property in Sharp Park, and they seem like they're doing pretty well. The coast live oak is, it's kind of a go-to tree around here for landscape architects. And the size of the tree is specified on the landscape drawings. It's a 24-inch box tree. The other main difference, I think, between this application and the previous one is there's a condition of approval for the deferred improvements for the remainder of the street improvements on Higgins Way. At the last iteration of this project, we were only building that out to 25 feet past the driveway, and there was not a condition for installing the remainder of the improvements along the frontage. But now we have a condition where if the other projects redevelop, that would trigger the requirement for this applicant to install those improvements. I think that's all I got. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Are there any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Campbell?
Can you just remind us about the bike access and the gate relocation up there?
Yeah, so the gate's being relocated to just beyond the end of the sidewalk improvements. And there's enough space in between the gate and the curb and gutter on the north side, so that bikes and peds can easily move around it. I think it's 6 feet clear, right? So peds and bikes can get around it, but cars cannot.
Thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner Berman?
With your previous work through Public Works, did you plan to extend the water main? It's hard to tell in the plans right now. Is the public main extending, or are you just connecting in the right-of-way? Because it looks like there's a public hydrant being connected to it. I wonder if it's an opportunity to extend the main and work with the city on confirming flows for the extension at the end of the run.
So, yeah, we're installing a fire hydrant at the end of the existing main, and then from the end of that main, there's a new 3/4 inch water service.
So that's going to be private?
That's private. So we weren't planning on extending the main at this point. I think that's a logical thing to do. I don't know if there's a nexus for it.
Mm-hmm. Is there property across the street?
Yes.
Is it currently developed?
It's not. It's undeveloped on the upslope side.
But with the potential to be developed as another home?
I think so. I know I've heard about, not applications, but people approaching the planning department about that site on and off over the years, but I'd have to defer to Christian about anything concrete on that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if we're extending water, whether private or public, and then there's an opportunity possibly for another home across the street, it might be worthwhile to make it a public extension, so then another property could connect to it in the future.
I think part of the issue is that the provision of water service is governed by the North Coast County Water District, and so the city doesn't make the decisions with respect to main extensions and provisions for future development in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that we can speak intelligently to those decisions, which are made by the Water District.
Okay. But then the building permit process that you'll go through again, you'll work with the Water District, correct?
Yes.
And so the Water District's indicated in the review of this project that a main extension may be required. It's not a comment that they make on most projects. So I know that the Water District will look very carefully at this, their ability to service this, and presumably other development which may occur, but again, that's outside of the city's jurisdiction and expertise.
Sure. Okay.
This was previously approved by the Water Department when the last building permit was issued. Same design. So they could come back and say, do a main extension, but based on what they approved previously, I'm not sure that they would.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any further questions for the applicant?
And Chair, if I could just clarify, the site immediately south of this is in unincorporated San Mateo County. So we've had discussions at the staff level with prospective applicants a number of times for areas to the southeast, which are within the city limits, but I don't know what the development potential is or if any applications may be imminent for the area directly across the street.
Thank you for that information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm now going to open the public comment part of this hearing. If there's anybody who would like to speak to this item, please bring up a card. And I'm not seeing any movement. Oh, well, go ahead, come up and speak so that we can keep the hearing moving. You can come up and speak and then fill out a card and make sure that it gets to staff. Okay. I'll do the card after. You'll do the card after, okay. And your name is?
My name is Karen Clark. I live at 1677 Higgins Way. I'm about 4 houses down from the gate. And I just want to give some context to this project so that you all understand. I assume you've all been up on Higgins Way. You know we have parking on one side of the street. We have a Montessori school on one side of the street that has 60 or so families come every day to bring their kids, pick up their kids. Hundreds of dog walkers, cyclists, hikers, every weekend. It's wall-to-wall cars. The other thing is, on this street, which is about 13 homes, over half of them have sold in the last 2 years. 2 of those homes have sold to an investor who has turned them into Airbnbs, essentially party houses. That same investor approached a 3rd seller before the house even went to market to try and buy up that one and turn it into an Airbnb. So it's a quiet residential street that a lot of people in Pacifica like to go up the trail behind, but what we're seeing is a lot of the original residents of the street, a lot of older people who have passed away, these homes are being sold as investments. So with this project, you know, I think certainly somebody has a right to build a home there on that land. I think there's a way to do it so that they can be a good neighbor, but my concerns are about huge construction vehicles coming up the street, which I might add, that street was repaved a number of years ago with grant money that the city of Pacifica got for a bike trail. So having huge vehicles coming up, causing potholes, you know, we have families with small children on the street, a lot of kids running up and down. I just want to give it some perspective about building a new home there, and certainly down the line, other projects that may happen either to the east or the south. Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to speak on this? Okay. And do make sure those cards get in. Okay. And staff will take care of that. And please, your name?
I'm Frank Gonzalez, 1689 Higgins. So I am the adjacent neighbor on Higgins. Let's see. I just have some notes and comments. First of all, I'd like to appreciate the effort that Mike and the design team have done in providing a turnaround of sorts. It's much better than what we had before. I also appreciate the 44-foot red curb that's being planned, 44 feet beyond the current gate, which I'm assuming is on both sides of the street. It's not quite clear from the drawings. All right. Point number 2, retaining wall. I'm concerned about the soldier pile wall long-term reliability. If you go to the site and you look by the gate, you will see my soldier pile wall kind of decomposed, partially due to the removal of these large eucalyptus trees that were right by the gate. There were one 22-inch diameter tree removed and stump ground, and 2 others removed. So if you walk the ground is pretty soft. Okay. Part of the drawings indicate that my degraded soldier pile wall will be removed and replaced. Replaced by what? It's not real clear.
Oh, can you speak into the mic, though, just to be, so we make sure we pick up everything in the transcript?
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, looking at C 2.02 site plan, The site plan doesn't show a retaining wall at road level. It shows a soldier pile wall at the driveway level. But if you really walk the site, you will see that probably you need to rethink how much retaining wall you need at road level, because if you go past the driveway, the first 20 feet are a steep drop. I'm saying just, you may want to look at that and rethink it. Also, water diversion will be an issue. I'm assuming that the current road will be enhanced and there'll be a curb that will guide the water down. Not sure if that was in the plan or not. Okay, section F, page 6. Quote, require nearby properties to pay their proportional share of the improvement at a later date. To me, what does that mean, right? Am I going to get assessed for the replacement of my soldier pile wall? Am I going to get assessed for a sidewalk, fire hydrant, which is in my property, by the way? I'd like to know ahead of time so I can, budget for this.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
And that's really about it.
Thank you. Make sure that card gets in.
Good evening. My name is Kirk Rosales. I'm representing the Rosales family and the Montessori School of Lindamar, right there on Higgins Way. We are concerned about this project with the gridlock and traffic that it may bring. Of course, the safety and welfare of our children is paramount for us as educators. We are mostly concerned about pickup and drop-off times at our school, Monday through Friday. We have a number of families, 60 families, about 75 children, all from the ages from about 2.5 to about 6 years old. Some of the families actually do walk to school. We are concerned during those pickup and drop-off times with the big trucks coming up the street, large vehicles, of course, and the gridlock and traffic that this project may bring to our little street, our one-way street. We are also concerned about any emergency vehicles getting through during that time. So this is paramount. What sort of plan do we have in place? There's a turnabout at the very end of our street right now, but I want to make clear, I want to be certain that there is a good emergency plan and maybe a plan in place for not to have these large trucks, large commercial construction vehicles coming around during pickup and drop-off times. We also have small children who do take naps. We don't think that's going to be a big problem because they're up the way. But that is just a small minor concern of our napping children. We do have nappers. Thank you.
I have a question of you. What are your pickup and drop-off times?
Roughly, there's a give and take. You have kids, parents, families that come a little bit early and some come a little bit late. 9 o'clock is the kind of the drop-off time, so 8:45 to 9:15 is the drop-off, and with the 2:45 to 3:15 being the later pickup time, of course. Yeah, that's just roughly the two busiest times, pickup times.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, I have one question for you. What specifically about the site proximity to the school or the road are you, is there a real concern about that? Or is it just a general concern that?
It's a general concern, like Karen and our neighbors know.
Okay.
That street can get the gridlock and traffic could really be bad, especially during those school days. It's bad during the weekends because of the mountain bikers and some of the Airbnbs we're seeing. Now, the concern we have is the parking of construction vehicles or the people who are going to be building this home. They're obviously going to be taking up some parking spots. This is a street that you can only park on one side. Now, that's going to be taking up a lot of spots. There's going to be a lot of gridlock in traffic on this street. There's only one turnabout at the end, and it's adjacent to our property on 1666. Sometimes I see people parking there. When that happens, it becomes, a little crazy on the street. Most of our neighbors do know that sometimes, you have to yell at someone on the street or another car passing by. This is just the reality of it. We're just really concerned about the safety and welfare of our families, of our children, especially during those key times.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Any further public comment? And please make sure that those orange cards get to staff. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and allow the applicant to come back up for rebuttal if such. And maybe he can address how to deal with parking and vehicles, construction vehicles and such.
Sure. So I want to touch on Karen's concern about the potential damage to the street. I believe there's a standard engineering condition that says thou shalt replace all of the damage to the street as directed by the city engineer, whether or not it was caused by your project. There's some very strong language to that effect in the COAs. I want to touch on what Franklin said about the soldier pile wall. I actually think his wall is a wood wall, so it has wood posts and wood lagging, and it's being replaced with a soldier pile wall, but that soldier pile wall has steel piles and temporary wood lagging with a permanent concrete facing. So eventually, if the wood lagging deteriorates, the permanent concrete facing will remain. So it's more of a permanent type of soldier pile wall. There is a red curb on both sides of the street. Franklin mentioned the steep drop as you come down in the driveway. That's correct. And there's actually a set of tiered retaining walls at that location. So there's two walls there to make up. It's quite a bit of grade difference, and we're using two walls to make that look a little better architecturally. Franklin was concerned about an assessment. I think he's referring to the deferred improvements reimbursement program. That would only apply to the future development of the properties down the road. He mentioned a fire hydrant in front of his property. That's correct. There's a fire hydrant being installed. It's in the public right-of-way, albeit it is in his frontage. It's in the public way. Kurt mentioned the concerns about parking and pickup and drop-off. This was partly resolved with the last application. I think we had provided a construction schedule to renew, and there was a specific date in there that was blocked out to coordinate with the Montessori school on their graduation. Like, let's not have concrete trucks, backed up on the street on their busiest day of the year. So the intention is to be a good neighbor and to coordinate with them. Most large deliveries, like if you're moving big equipment in and out, it has to be done early in the morning. Those guys aren't, bringing big excavators and things like that in during rush hour. It's not practical. So a lot of times that stuff will happen at 5 or 6 in the morning before the crew even shows up. The parking is a challenge though, and I think that's just something that the applicant is going to have to work with neighbors and be respectful of that. Once the driveway goes in, that opens up a lot of parking for construction workers. The driveway is 100 feet long, and it's wide enough to park 2 cars. So most people in the trades are gonna, park as close as they can on the driveway because they're carrying their tools and equipment in and out.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Any final questions of the applicant before? Okay, you're good. Giving everybody a chance to ask questions if they have them. Okay, I'm going to now bring it back to the commission.
On tape.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Okay, and it's time to deliberate, folks. Commissioner Big Stick.
Sure. So first of all, in terms of damage to street, and I do know that there are some conditions of approval in there that any damage done has to be taken care of by the applicant, but how extensive is that? How, if there's damage done to the street by big, heavy trucks coming through, how far up does the applicant have to consider the damage that might be done? Or is the damage conceivably negligible?
I think the important factor is that the Public Works inspector would determine whether the damage was attributable to the project. And so I'm not sure that there's a, linear limitation on how far away that is from the project, in my understanding of the process. So if they can demonstrate that it was the weight or the type of equipment or an erroneous method of transport, and they can attribute it to the project, I would imagine that repair would be required.
Thank you. So Mike mentioned there would be in the past there has been a construction schedule. Unless I glossed over it, I don't recall seeing a construction schedule in relation to this project. So A, did I miss it? And B, is that something we could look into or put a condition for approval on? Would it be appropriate to put some sort of condition of approval in terms of the drop-off and pickup times for the school?
Well, what's different between this project and the 2016 project review is that the applicant had not provided a schedule prior to the 2016 hearing. I think learning from that experience, the applicant provided a schedule, and the condition of approval also required identification of contact information for the contractor and the owner so that could be shared with the Montessori school. The city sought to stay out of the middle of that coordination responsibility, but rather to burden the project developer with that coordination requirement. And so that would be our preference if the commission's concerned about impacts to the school operation for the pickup and drop off, for example. But we have the construction schedule. It's in relative terms right now because the absolute construction dates are unknown. But the phasing of various required equipment and materials deliveries are indicated, the number of vehicles estimated for the delivery, as well as the contact information. And so we already have what we believe would have been required by the condition in 2016.
Okay, so we have a construct that seems comparable at present.
I believe that to be the case, yes.
And then the other concern was parking. I was actually struck when I went up there because off the top of my head, I can't think of another place in town where I see that many signs, or any signs for that matter, limiting the stay of a car to 2 hours. And that was the first thing I noticed when I got up there and I was driving down was, oh, everywhere I look, there's a sign that says no longer than 2 hours. So can you address the parking concern?
Not sure I understand the question. Address what parking concern or what?
Well, so already apparently parking is pretty tight up there. In your opinion, would this add to because in my mind as I'm trying to think it through, it would seem like the trucks would be kind of on the other side of where everybody else would be parking. I would think that the trucks would be over there on the lot or thereabouts, which I would think would be kind of outside of the range of where most people's traffic would be. Is that more or less how you understand it, or might it add to parking in such a way that is a part of the discussion we should be having?
Well, I think to start, it's not this project applicant's responsibility to solve the existing narrow street or parking congestion that occurs due to whatever existing uses there are, that be the trail, the school, the single-family residences, the Airbnbs, what have you. There's some distance between the Montessori school and this project site. This site's at the far east end of this area. And so, as far as proximity, I don't think the conditions could get more favorable. I don't quite understand all of the concerns, except for if trucks are moving slowly in or out of the site during a pickup or drop-off period, which is a point well taken. Beyond that, these vehicles for the project, I would imagine, as the applicant said, are going to strive to be as close to the site as they can be. because it doesn't make sense to offload heavy materials or equipment any farther than you have to. There is the potential for conflict coming in and out, but any staging that needs to happen in the street would be addressed through an encroachment permit through the Public Works Department. So I think it's up to them to determine the scheduling and the placement of any on-street areas taken up for deliveries or construction staging.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Kresge?
My question was answered.
Okay. Commissioner Campbell?
Just curious, and I don't know, maybe this is a question for the applicant, but I go up there a lot. I bike up there. Where's the heavy equipment? Where do they turn around up there? Because that's quite a street, and I don't see much space beyond the gate, but maybe I'm wrong now.
I'm not sure that there is an opportunity to turn around. I think they're likely to have to back out, but the applicant might have more insight into that.
No. Mike? Do you got to back down on that whole street?
I'm not sure. I don't operate heavy equipment. I would imagine that that's an option, probably to back into the site and then leave facing forward. You know, there is a small turnaround up there, so depending on the size of the equipment, they may be able to utilize that. But I know large equipment had come in and out of there previously to do some of the grading to facilitate the access. And, you know, one other thing I'll say about that is they may be limited, the size of the equipment may be limited based on what's, you know, what they can readily get in and out of there. And I think, if I remember correctly, they use smaller equipment like mini excavators and bobcats to do a lot of the grading initially.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
Yeah, more of a conversation for the commissioners. It's actually a very interesting application in that there's not much discussion or any objection to the house itself. You know, we're just talking about the logistics, which are legitimate concerns, but honestly, this is a single-family house, so heavy equipment means some deliveries, maybe a concrete truck. Mostly it's going to be pickup trucks, you know, with guys in it. So I think, you know, I don't want to exaggerate the type of work that's happening here. It's just a house. And for the parking, you know, this is the public right-of-way. People should be able to park up there if they need to build. And if the applicant's going to work with the Montessori school and neighbors on specific, you know, dates like graduations where they need to be accommodated, I think that's reasonable. And I even think like damage to street has been somewhat overstated, you know. There, you know, yes, maybe a bobcat scratches the street or something, but it's really limited, I think, to just trucks with tires driving up the street, which is not going to do damage. So that said, if there's no real discussion about the house itself, I think, you know, the applicant is allowed to build, allowed to drive trucks in there, works with the neighbor. Damage to the street is actually already covered. So, you know, I would move to approve this without any other, you know, points of discussion on the application itself.
You done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Commissioner?
Well, actually, Commissioner Rubenstein it sort of stole my thunder, actually. I was in favor of the project that we got in 2016. I'm in favor of this project. I think it's well thought out. I think the staff report in a very detailed way, kind of laid out how this project conforms to the general plan / zoning / you know, just sort of site development permit requirements. And I'm very comfortable with the project. I like it. There have been some construction-related impacts that have been raised, and I think the applicant or the applicant's agent has certainly laid out efforts to work in reasonably and in good faith with the community to mitigate those impacts. So I'm in agreement that we ought to just move forward with approval.
Okay. Commissioner Ruman?
I'm in favor of the project as well, and I just wanted to touch back on the large vehicles accessing the road. Given that there's homes already in this area, a fire truck has to access it. So I don't have quite the same concerns in regards to just excavators or construction vehicles, and exactly what Commissioner Rubenstein said, it's a home, so it's not like it's an entire school campus. So I as well am in favor of the project.
Okay, Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, I'm in favor of the project. I think I approved this project before. I would say that I think it's okay to consider citizens and neighbors' issues with traffic and circulation. I think, we sit up here, but we're the Citizens Planning Commission. If it was just about the house, this could be an over-the-counter thing for the planning department. So we're kind of up here, I think. We don't want to be too cavalier, I think, with citizens' concerns about, things that are going to happen next to them. We don't have to live for the next year with the construction. So that said, I'm in favor of it.
Yeah. And really my point was, are there things we can do to mitigate it, like we do in some other, like we can't say you can only have 3 trucks at a time or something like that. It's really not practical.
I think the conditions of approval also address some of the concerns, which it's nice that the project has had a couple years of design under its belt and review through the city. So, I agree with many of the concerns that the public has, but I think the conditions of approval are well stated for the concerns.
Okay, I have one more light, but I also want to speak, so I'm going to take the opportunity to do that. I voted for this project before. The changes that have been made look to me like improvements to the project. I think it's a better project now than it was before, and I was perfectly happy with it before. So I will be voting for it when the time comes. The concern about big equipment is, as Mr. O'Connell said, it's generally delivered very early, right at the limits of the city's requirements. And I've had big equipment delivered to sites, and they get it in onto the site as fast as they can. Time's money with those things. They're very expensive to have on site. So there is no wasted time in terms of getting it onto the site. They don't leave it sitting around on the street. Okay, and Commissioner Big Stick.
Sure, it's certainly my style to try and address the public's concern as much as possible with my own questions. And so I take that approach whenever possible. That being said, through asking to the best of my ability the concerns I heard, I had an answer to my satisfaction. I'll be happy to vote in favor of this project as well.
Okay, so now we're at the point where somebody needs to make a motion.
Oh, I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Yeah.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Where do I read it here?
Page 40.
Sorry. I'm going to make a motion to approve the project on page 40. I just skipped. I move that the Planning Commission finds the project exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, approves site development permit PSD 841-19 by adopting the attached resolution, including conditions of approval in Exhibit A, and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
And Commissioner Niblin?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Okay, we have 6 in favor and 1 no vote. And you have an approved project. Anyone aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission has 10 calendar days to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. Okay, moving on to the next item. File number 2019-031, text amendment TA 117-19 to amend the existing zoning regulations in order to incorporate amendments to the California law related to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling unit construction. Can I have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Chair Clifford and Commissioners. I am Associate Planner Bonnie O'Connor. In October 2019, the California Legislature enacted Senate Bill 13, Assembly Bill 68, and Assembly Bill 881, further amending Government Code Section 65852.2 and Government Code Section 65852.22, which regulates the establishment of accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and junior ADUs, respectively. The pending January 1, 2020 effective date of these ADU bills will further reduce the already narrow range of standards that a local agency can impose on ADUs and junior ADUs. These changes will cause our current ADU regulations to be out of compliance with the amended government code sections. Language in the government code section nullifies and voids local ordinance regulating ADU construction if such ordinances do not comply with its provisions. Therefore, staff has prioritized these amendments to maintain local control over future ADU and junior ADU applications. The revisions proposed primarily focus on maintaining consistency with the revised government code sections. The most notable changes that were made include reducing rear and side setbacks for ADUs, removing the 26-foot street width standard and 10-foot distance between structured standards for ADUs, removing the owner occupancy requirement, removing the need to provide replacement parking for the primary dwelling structure when converted into an ADU, adding mixed-use zoning districts and multifamily dwelling units to properties that could establish ADUs, and adding standards to approve a junior ADU in a single-family dwelling. Amendments were also made to various other articles throughout the zoning code to clarify ADUs and junior ADUs as permitted uses in various zoning districts as required by the ADU bills, to add reference of junior ADUs in the coastal zoning combining district requirements and processes, and to exempt ADUs and junior ADUs from requiring a historic preservation permit on applicable properties. Staff recommends the Commission to move to recommend this ordinance to the City Council for adoption, and that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, were these amendments made to conform with state law? Are they kind of a mandatory thing that we just need to do to bring ourselves in alignment with state law, or were some of them made at our discretion?
Do you mind? So, yes and yes. Most of them are made to comply with the mandatory requirements of state law. I've highlighted in this slides the few areas where we've provided some discretion, which will give you guys some focus of your conversation. So to quickly go over what the state mandates, it's one ADU or one junior ADU with an existing or proposed single-family unit on residential or mixed-zone properties, and one detached ADU on lots with an existing proposed single-family unit. Now, on multifamily unit lots with mixed-use zoning or residential zoning, we must allow for ADUs to be created in space that is not used as livable space, and we must allow for not more than 2 detached ADUs on these properties. So there's several requirements that go with these, but in a nutshell, we have to allow those. So focusing on where you guys may have some latitude to change the requirements, I've highlighted the optional regulations that you may want to discuss. So the state requires us to allow ADUs at least 16 feet in height. The optional regulation that is proposed in the ordinance in front of you allows an increase in height for ADUs that meet specific setbacks, and those setbacks are consistent with what a single-family home would have. A mandatory regulation for ADUs also is that no lot coverage maximum or landscape minimum may be applied for ADUs 800 square feet or less in size. We have included provisions that do apply lot coverage maximums and landscape minimums for ADUs greater than 800 square feet in size. So focusing on these two optional regulations, if you wanted to choose to remove any lot coverage maximum for all ADUs or any landscape minimums for all ADUs, we can choose to do that, or manage the height of all ADUs at 16 feet in height. Continuing on, the law requires us to allow ADUs less than 800 square feet in size on any street. We did have a requirement that prohibited ADUs on, or detached or detached ADUs on properties with street frontages that had a street width of 26 feet in width or less. Based on public feedback that we've received from our Home for All efforts and our Plan Pacifica efforts, we've heard of increased support for ADUs, and this has definitely been a hindrance for some to create ADUs on their properties. So we have proposed to remove this requirement, but if it's something that you guys would like to continue on for ADUs greater than 800 square feet in size, that's something that can be discussed. And then we are required to allow detached ADUs of 800 square feet in size or less that have a structure or setback that is consistent with building code. And again, we could reapply the 10-foot structure setback that we had previously for ADUs greater than 800 square feet. But again, that standard was a hindrance for those trying to create ADUs on their properties. And then finally, parking. We are not allowed to require parking for most scenarios of ADUs. There are a unique situation where one parking spot for the ADU may be required. This spot can be created within the existing driveway. It doesn't have to be a garage. It really can be anywhere on the property. And so the ordinance in front of you includes continuing requiring that one space when we're able to, but you can choose to remove all parking requirements for all ADUs if you choose. So it's really those 5 options that you can focus your discussion on in terms of options.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
Does the 16-foot height limit for attached ADUs, does it limit the type of ADU that can be built in a single-family house, or is it meant to be a structure that's attached to a house?
So the 16-foot height limitation is for the measurement of the ADU from, and I asked this question of our legal team to get their reasonable interpretation, and the assumption was, or the understanding was that it should be measured from the ground. So we shouldn't, it wouldn't be appropriate to allow an attached ADU on top of an already 35-foot high single-family building.
Yeah.
That height requirement is from the ground.
I was thinking, like, if in a single-family house, if somebody wanted to do it in a garage, for example, it's probably not 16 feet. Is that?
So if they're converting existing space,
yeah,
then that's a different category of an ADU. That's
okay.
And that doesn't have a height requirement.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Berman?
I guess touching off of that conversation, what if a single-family home wanted to build an ADU so the single-family home's a 1-story, and they wanted to build a 2nd story under 35 feet tall for the total structure, would that, because then from the ground to the top of the ADU would still be greater than 16?
Yeah, so, assuming that it's on top of the single-family home, it would meet the setbacks of what a standard single-family home would have. And so our code allows for a maximum height to be of 35 feet, which would apply to that ADU because it has those same.
So if it's a part of, even if it's an addition, if it's a part of the original structure, the 16-foot max doesn't really apply?
The way that the ordinance is written in front of you, the 16-foot max would only apply if the ADU is projecting into these minimal setbacks that a single-family home wouldn't be able to project into. So that's, the assumption would be it would have to be on the ground in those situations.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. That was just a quick additional question, but my original question, so the possibility of requiring one parking stall, what are some I guess, is it unknown what property types or what lot types might require one parking stall? Or do you have any examples?
So an example of a ADU that would require a parking spot would be a detached ADU greater than 850 square feet in size and more than a half mile from a public transit stop.
Okay.
So Park Pacifica, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that's going to be an obvious, or the back of Rockaway, or the far reaches of Valley Mar.
Okay.
Or Peter Point.
Yeah, some of those homes are the bigger lots too, which may be more accommodating of an ADU. So they should be able to provide, it would be feasible logically to provide the additional parking spot. I just wonder if we're going to run into a lot of issues with either not requiring parking when they really should, or either requiring parking and it's infeasible.
So as the ordinance is written now, we are requiring parking when, in those few instances that we can. And the way that the state requires us to allow those parking spaces, it's typically very feasible for any property to accommodate it.
And it's on-site parking, right? Off-street?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it can be in the front setback. It can be on just using your driveway counts as a parking spot.
Okay. I don't know, I see this as being probably one of the community's biggest concerns.
Commissioner Nevlin?
Thank you. I just wanted to refresh my recollection. Well, actually, I had a clarifying question, then refresh my recollection. And I think I may have just missed it. As you were kind of going through the various changes at a high level, was one of the things we talked about eliminating a requirement for owner occupancy of a main residence in connection with an ADU?
So yeah, an ADU, the state requires us to no longer require owner occupancy of the site. For a JADU, that is a requirement.
Okay. And then just sort of kind of thinking about, I was looking at some of the findings in support of the ordinance, and one of the things I noted was a lot of, a significant increase in the number of Airbnb units listed in Pacifica over the course of time between 2015 and 2019. And I was trying to just clarify and confirm that ADUs themselves, we can restrict those to only longer leases than 30 days, for example. So we don't have to allow short-term rental of ADUs or whatever they are, junior ADUs.
Yeah, so yes, the state law requires us to prohibit short-term rentals on these special cases ADU, these mandatory ADUs that I went through. We have the option of, and that's one I didn't add in here, but we have the option of allowing short-term rentals for ADUs that don't meet those, that definition, but again, that would be very few, and I don't think that's the intention of us supporting this ADU ordinance.
The way we've got it set up, no short-term rental of any ADU.
Correct.
Thank you.
Commissioner Campbell, you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the setback issue, and just because I was, it's me, I was a little confused, but we are allowing less setback for the detached ADUs in some instances?
So we have to allow for a 4-foot rear inside setback for ADUs, any type of ADU. The way that our ordinance is written is that if you take advantage of those reduced setbacks, then we're going to limit you to the minimum 16-foot height, and I guess that's it. But if you move your ADU back to what a standard home,
like 20 feet.
20 feet from the rear or 5 feet from the side, then you can build it taller and take advantage of more height.
And that's what's proposed?
That is what's in your ordinance in front of you, yeah, as drafted.
And right in the way it stands today is that, and the way it stands today and as not proposed, I mean, what's the standard right now?
You need a 20-foot rear setback or a 5-foot side setback for a detached ADU. I believe it's the same for an attached.
16 feet or not? Just all of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Big Stick, you also have a question?
Yeah, mine are, so there were a couple little question marks that popped up as I was reading through, and frankly, by answering it, you'll just help me reconcile with what I read and gain a clearer understanding. One of them was just a potential typo, and the other two are a little bit more substantive. The typo thing is on page 95, and again, it might not be a typo. As I'm reading this, I'm trying to wrap my head around a language that I don't speak as fluently, so if I'm mistaken, please guide me so I can have a better understanding. So, I'm looking at subsection 1 under M, and there's just this line in there, if section of the government code is amended subsequent to the effective date of the article, say to define public transit inclusive of a minimum level of transit service, and the following definition shall replace the preceding definition in subsection L, public transit. I think that L should be an M.
I believe you're correct.
Okay, cool. So that was the nitpicky thing. The other two, so on page 97, now I'm in subsection 10. Any accessory dwelling unit may have an interior point of access connecting the primary dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit, provided as possible for the occupants of both the primary dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit to independently secure the point of access to prevent unauthorized entry by occupants of the other dwelling unit. So, okay, I read that. I understood that part clear enough. It appears to be under A, which is general provisions. And then later on, under E, which is accessory dwelling units contained within existing space of a single-family dwelling. Number 6, subsection 6, exterior access and exterior point of access that is separate and independent from the primary dwelling unit shall be provided. So it seemed like the general thing would have caught that and superseded it, but then it's here down here. So I was hoping you could just help me reconcile in my mind what's going on there.
So the standard for E is to just clarify that an entrance to the ADU from the exterior needs to be provided so that someone is not required to walk through the primary dwelling unit to get into the ADU. And then the subsection 10 on page 97 that you first identified, that is clarifying that if there's a door or something that connects the ADU to the primary dwelling unit, that can remain as long as it's secured to protect both occupants.
Presumably it would be from the exterior, though, if that were the case. No.
From the interior.
Oh, from the interior.
Yeah. So if someone was to convert their downstairs into an ADU and they put up a door or something to separate the ADU, an interior door to separate the ADU from the upstairs, this is just clarifying that that door would have to be able to be locked from both sides, kind of like conjoining hotel rooms.
So there could be an interior point of access, but there must be an exterior point of
Correct.
access.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. And one last one. Getting back to parking, there's a bit on page 103, and it was confusing when I read it. And it's subsection 6. No off-street parking shall be required for an ADU in any of the following circumstances. And subsection 6, circumstance number IV4. When on-street parking permits are required but not offered to the occupant of the accessory dwelling unit, in that instance, no off-street parking shall be required. So the way I'm reading that is essentially they don't have a clear path for on-street parking, and in that instance, no off-street parking is required, despite the fact that they don't necessarily have a clear path for on-street parking. Am I reading that properly?
I'm not sure. So the language is directly from the state. So this is mandated language that we must apply. But I believe the intention is that if a neighborhood requires parking permits for the on-street parking, that and an ADU occupant is not eligible to receive one of those permits, that they're not required to provide any off-street parking. I understand the counter understanding. It seems a little backwards, but I don't know if this situation even applies in Pacifica.
I'm not aware of any permit parking procedure on any of the public streets.
So one of the public sent us an email and addresses permits at some point, and I figure part and parcel with what might become at least a slightly more robust conversation in the deliberation portion, because I'd like to hear public comment first. I kind of wanted to have as robust an understanding of the provisions here before I go into that later.
Sure. What I take this to mean is that the state's saying you cannot use a permit parking program as a means to frustrate development of ADUs. So you can't say, we only issue parking permits to primary dwelling unit occupants. Sorry, you have to provide 3 parking spaces for your ADU, or even the 1 parking space that the state says you can provide. That's not an option. So it depends which way you're coming at it. I think whether it seems backwards or not, to me, I think it's perfectly clear it's not a means to limiting development of ADUs.
Okay, so just somewhere in the back of my head, this being the case, it potentially complicates a person renting an ADU under these conditions, which at this point probably don't apply to us anyway.
I'm not sure how it complicates the matter for
the person renting the ADU. So if somebody is looking to rent an ADU, but they would need a permit, but they can't get a permit, and there's no off-street parking for them, presumably for that individual, that might be a more complicated process for them figuring out the dynamic of then renting that ADU.
Well, I think it may affect the desirability of the ADU if there's no parking. However, that decision's made at the time the ADU is permitted. So it's not really the issue for the occupant to resolve, it's the property owner that's developing the ADU. And the city's saying at the time of issuing this building permit, is there a permit parking program? If so, are the permits available to occupants of the ADU? If they're not, per the ordinance regulating the parking permits, then no parking is required for that ADU.
Build it anyway.
Build it anyway.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it looks like we've reached the end of questions. I don't have any today. But we do have, we're going to now open the public comment phase of this hearing. And if you could send your card up and come up and talk. Hand the card over there. Very good. And come up and announce your name. And you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Great. My name's Michael Vernazza.
Speak into the mic, please.
My name's Michael Vernazza. I live on Adobe Street over in Lindemar, just up the way from where these folks are talking about. I got super concerned as soon as that language said non-owner occupied. I think maybe down the path you were thinking. Over the last 12 months, I haven't had one new neighbor that has purchased a home that is either from California, let alone the United States of America, nor do they even live in that property. And to me, this is an absolute, I mean, if I was a multimillionaire, this would be the greatest thing that's ever happened. Every single garage, from what I read, could have its own address and effectively be rented out. And since we don't police Airbnb, I'm just extremely concerned that we're pricing our local community members and even anyone that has a chance of buying a home anywhere in the Bay Area to be even more difficult. And I am absolutely a free market person, but when you're fighting against global markets that have amazing dollars, I'm extremely concerned on what this does to our community. It doesn't sound like we can stop it or curtail it in any way. Can the Planning Commission say we're only going to do 100 ADUs a year, or is there any framework you can build around this so my whole neighborhood doesn't get bought up by Russians and Chinese? Not that I care, but they don't even live there or participate in our communities. And I'm a 6th generation San Francisco Bay Area person that just sees that opportunity going away. And I just got lucky because I hit it on a startup, and that's the only reason I can even be in this town anyways. So I just looking for guidance, or maybe there's some way to handle that kind of language. I mean, if you are an owner occupied, you're obviously not going to blow out Airbnb parties, and you're probably going to rent somebody that you could at least want to be your neighbor. If you don't even live here at all you're going to think about is how much money can I make, because now this 3-1 rancher in Lindemar that's selling for $1 million is certainly worth 1.3 or 1.4 if I can get 6 to 7 grand a month in rent. And that's my concern. So I'm wondering if anyone could comment, because this is an amazing town that I really don't want to turn into Redwood City or these other places.
Commissioner Big Stick, did you have a question for the applicant? Or not the applicant, but the speaker?
I don't have a question, but after his time, I have a comment that could at least maybe partially address the concern.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, now it's your turn.
Thank you very much.
I will close the public hearing, and I will bring it back to the commission.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your concern. It's my understanding, and staff, please correct me if I'm mistaken in my understanding. The idea here is, first of all, we have it written in to the way we do things that, here, let's start here. ADUs, you can't rent them for less than 30 days at a stretch, correct?
Correct.
Cool. So the idea there, that was specifically put in place to try and preclude Airbnbs, et cetera, from renting them out. That's the intention, as I understand it. So with that intention being there, again, my understanding is the reason the state has put this in place the way they have, the idea being, especially the Bay Area, if not all of California, being in something of a housing crisis, is the term constantly used, and which seems to be observable, is that we then start adding housing stock because demand is high and supply is very, very low. And so in theory, and I appreciate skepticism, one ADU at a time, but in theory, if we have a lot of ADUs going on, that's going to raise the housing stock. The supply goes up, which means hopefully prices at least even out, if not start dipping a little bit, so that working folk can afford to live here and don't have to commute 3 hours for their job being a courtesy clerk at a grocery store or what have you. Is I believe the theory behind all of this. So again, what we're trying to accomplish by doing this is as many ADUs as possible so that we start having affordable housing anywhere in the Bay Area. And that's what it's trying to accomplish. And again, that safeguard against there being perpetual Airbnbs everywhere is that hopefully by limiting a minimum of 30 days that you have to rent the space, which still might be appealing to investors who want to rent it out indefinitely, but maybe not as much as investors who want to do this short-term profits. And that's my comment on that.
Commissioner Campbell?
Yeah, just as far as keeping the parking regulations as they are and maintaining as much parking requirement as possible, I think we should. I've been hearing from folks, I don't live in Rockaway, but I'm hearing from a lot of folks in Rockaway that the parking is becoming crazy back there as these homes are getting filled with multiple people. It's certainly happening in Valamar, and I'm sure it's happening throughout the city. And so I think we should push back as much as we can on maintaining the parking requirements. I think also that we should keep the setbacks to 20 feet. Having a 16-foot structure a mere 4 feet from your backyard, I think is a complete way to kill the livability of your of that house and the backyard, privacy concerns, everything. I think it's going to decrease property values throughout the city if we kind of go this way. And you know, we're a bedroom community. We kind of live. I mean, a third of our budget is property values. I don't think we should just start to diminish those. I know the property values are going up, but it's cyclical. You know, everything's cyclical when this job market cools, and it will. And housing, you know, what are we going to be left with after this housing crisis is addressed? So I would push back on that as well. So keep the setbacks as much as we can, keep the parking requirements as much as we can. You know, and I don't want to get on a soapbox too much, but you know, for those of us who, and you know, I'm a third generation Californian, for those of us who kind of built up these neighborhoods, played by the planning and zoning rules, made them really nice places to live, they increased in value. And now, because a lot of, you know, big companies decided to move here and want their employees here, we're supposed to carry their water and destroy all our planning and zoning requirements to accommodate their needs. And then they're not going to be around forever, and we're going to end up with jam-packed, no privacy, no backyard homes. With, you know, and if Scott Wiener has his way, apartment buildings up and down Lindemar and deep into some of their neighborhoods. I don't know. I get what ADU was supposed to be about. It seemed like at first, which was to accommodate some, you know, maybe get some rental income for some families, allow some extended family to live with you. And this has become like a kind of a free-for-all. I think it's just a gift to the real estate industry, basically. But anyway, I just would hope that we can kind of push back on this, because I think it's really starting to hurt the neighborhoods.
Commissioner Niblin?
Thank you. I'm broadly in favor of, things that we can do to spur the development of ADUs, but I do have to say that I agree with many of Commissioner Campbell's points. I think the most recent, as it happens, it doesn't look like there's really too much we can do, except at the margins, frankly, with respect to some of this. I think pushing back with respect to setbacks and parking, I don't think I would disagree with that as a proposition. And I guess the piece where I feel a little bit, I feel it's a little unfortunate, I feel a little conflicted, has to do with the kind of the notion of owner occupancy. I think that ADUs, broadly speaking, when you've got an owner there in the house, is it's probably a good thing. It's somebody who's invested in the community and somebody who is going to serve as a check for some of the things I see. I have a buddy who lives up in Fairmont, and he's got a house across the street that is, I think, essentially used as a flop house where, and it's probably leased for long term, but there are undoubtedly several adults who live there, and it creates a significant impact. And I can just imagine if there was an ADU in addition that could be rented in the same property, the impacts would just be supremely detrimental. They're already pretty significant. So I don't know that there's too much we can do with what we've got in terms of the law. And again, I want to state that I think that ADUs are, and these new junior units are an important tool, and I think we need to do things to facilitate them in every place where they're appropriate. It is at least possibly the case that there are some properties where an ADU simply doesn't make sense. I think that in most instances it does, and in most instances we should do what we can to facilitate them. But it's been liberalized a lot, and it's a shame again that we can't require that there be an owner there to keep an eye on things, an owner resident.
Commissioner Berman?
So my basic understanding of the recent Senate bills, Assembly bills, especially geared towards housing, is that we don't have a lot of control over maybe items we don't prefer. Can you guys clarify, maybe in layman's terms, exactly what we have flexibility to kind of change? I know, Bonnie, thank you for the slides. Is that literally all the flexibility we have? So we can't change the fact that the property doesn't have to be owned by the person living there? Okay.
No.
So what happens, let's say we don't accept these municipal code changes, what happens? Then ADUs just get approved based off of state requirement?
Correct.
Okay.
So I would just add that after January 1st, 2020, these state laws go into effect, and to the extent that any of the city's municipal codes contradict state law would supersede the city's municipal codes relating to, or zoning codes relating to ADUs.
Okay. Okay, and so I guess just touching off of that, maybe we could talk about the things that we do have control over. Bonnie, do you mind putting the slide up again so we can visualize it? So I think maybe maintaining a maximum and a minimum for maximum lot coverage might be helpful, and then minimum landscaping to maintain would be good. I would be in favor for that. Would we have to come up with a percentage?
What is proposed, I have applied this optional regulation, and what I've proposed is consistent with what a single family, what the underlying zoning would require. So for a single family zoned lot,
20% landscape, or, yeah.
Exactly, and 40% maximum coverage.
Okay.
And I would just add that any standards that are applied must be objective standards.
Yes.
They cannot be subjective.
Well, I just wanted to kind of start that conversation, but I'm sure others have more comments.
Okay, Commissioner Rubenstein?
Yeah, ADUs are, it's like an interesting debate because on one end, it could, benefit the housing crisis in Pacifica because you're building smaller units that would be more affordable for people. But it does change the character of a neighborhood, and because you're building more density, so there's more cars and more people in houses and whatnot. And so I'm wondering, when you build an ADU, are there fees that can be attached to the ADU or code upgrades for the house itself that can be mandatory? So maybe those fees go towards a park fee or parking, something that benefits the community. And, generally speaking, building ADUs would be a boon, I think, to the property tax roll because, you can't build new houses, but you could build, whatever they can build, 100 new units that, you can have property taxes collected on that. So just curious about.
So the state doesn't allow us to charge impact fees any longer on ADUs 750 square feet in size or less. Impact fees for ADUs greater than 750 square feet in size have to be proportional to the size of the unit. So we've got to develop some standards for that.
Yeah. What about like code upgrades to the home that the ADU is attached to or detached from?
No.
Okay.
Amazing.
Commissioner Big Stick?
Sure. So I have two things. First of all, I appreciate Commissioner Campbell's remarks and the way they've been echoed, and I really don't disagree with them at all. That being said, lately I've been working a lot of 7-day work weeks. In point of fact, stringing them together before I went on this very minor leadership retreat on behalf of the nonprofit I was representing. In that instance, I got off of a 21-day work week into that retreat, and I'm currently in the middle of a 13-day work week, also that I can afford to live with my handful of roommates in the home we occupy. And that being said, I actually have a great deal of respect for your comments and agree with them. So I think that the way the California law was written was robust enough that if we're able to push back as much as possible, it's still an exceedingly liberal state mandate, even if we lean against it as conservatively as we can. Its goal, for all intents and purposes, I think, is a fait accompli. And after that, I have no problem going along with any pushback, but absolutely have a very visceral understanding of the state of affairs in our area. After that, so I saw this email like I imagine the rest of you did about parking, and it interested me to a point, kind of dovetailing a little bit off of my experience earlier when I was seeing all those signs around Higgins, 2-hour parking. And every time we turn around lately, it's a parking conversation, whether that be on Salada, whether it be on Higgins. We need a sharp parking structure, presumably at some point, and other city-related matters. Everything is parking, parking, parking. And what this email brought to my attention was an approach taken in Oregon, which I thought was interesting. Not that I'm necessarily advocating for a permit process here in town, but that's what the sender of the email raised, was the premise of a permit process. And my understanding is, at the end of the night, what we're doing is sending recommendations to council, recommendations of what the ordinance to be, but I wonder if part and parcel to that, if there's any interest in what a permit process could look like. Maybe there's a side note. We also think that maybe a permit process at this juncture would be an appropriate investigation by council so that we can start sussing out what appropriate measures for reining in parking might look like.
And you're
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Just, was I right in that, I mean, if we had a permit scheme, which would be like something with potential, but the ADU, you could still build it anyway?
Yep.
And so but the parking, the person who lived in the ADU would still have to get a permit? No.
So at the time of the application for the ADU, that requirement could not be considered. But once the ADU was built, I think then there could be some sort of parking permit requirement imposed. So all residents of that parcel may need to have a parking permit.
Okay, so you can't frustrate an ADU with the parking permit program, but you can have a parking permit program, and everybody has to follow it.
Right.
But you can have as many ADUs as you want.
But you couldn't frustrate the application process for an ADU.
Right, but the person who builds the ADU might not, I mean, the permits may be all taken. Even though they have the right to build the ADU, the permits may all be taken, so as the function of the parking permit program may still work.
So I'm curious at this point, because at this point we're discussing a permit process that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if, and again, I don't know, and that's why I would recommend an investigation, but I'm wondering if there's no such thing as an open-ended permit process where simply if you clearly live at an address, you're entitled to a permit that you could then apply for through the police department or whatever. Or whether or not, when we investigate it, we come to the conclusion there's only X number of permits, and if you didn't get one already, oh well. And I think that until there's a proper study done, I don't know that we could have that answer tonight. And I'm just recommending we might think it's a good idea just to do that study to see if that might be an answer to parking issues.
And I'm going to say that I think we're off topic with this. We're completely off topic. We're talking ADUs at this point, and we've shifted over to parking, which is not what we're here to do tonight.
Chair, if I could just offer one staff observation. The subject of permit parking comes up periodically at the city council level. Typically, you'll hear from the police chief that it's something that absolutely can be done, but there are meaningful staffing impacts on the police department for administration of the program, for enforcement of the program. And at the end of the day, you're likely to adversely impact a lot of property owners, and so the community will for a parking permit program remains to be fully vetted. I think it would be appropriate if it was the will of the commission to make some general statement such that, to the extent the city is prohibited from requiring off-street parking for accessory dwelling units, a comprehensive permit parking program for all residential dwelling units should be explored by the city council to manage parking. Something like that is probably within the realm of reason and within the commission's purview, but to get into studying parking program options is certainly not a charge of the commission at this time.
That was what I had in mind when I suggested it. I by no means meant to get into nuts and bolts.
Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and have my turn. And I really like the idea of pushing back where we can. We need to maintain as much control as possible. We don't have much. If we can push back on setbacks and things like that, I would like to see us do that. And Commissioner Niblin?
I think in that spirit, I was hoping to see again some of the additional slides that we had that sort of showed red text, there we go, that stuff that we haven't actually proposed, that at least not in the text that we've got here, that perhaps there'd be some interest in, I think on the part of the commission in maybe folding in this 26, well, I guess you've got the 26-foot wide street, and I guess in some narrow circumstances where you might be able to do that, ADUs greater than 800 square feet, and then the structure setback for detached ADUs greater than 800 square feet. So was there one other slide after this, or was I misrecalling? There we go. So I guess those three kind of things in red, is that something where we could get some, if we gave you the direction, we could get that kind of language folded into whatever ultimately goes to City Council as our recommendation?
So the text in red is language that we've removed, just based on feedback that staff has heard and interpreted from our community outreach efforts in supporting ADUs. So the removal of the 26 feet street width requirement could be easily added back in. It would have to be amended in a manner to still allow the 800 square foot ADUs that meet the certain setbacks, but.
Because my thought was, when you start getting bigger than 800 square feet, that's a pretty good size ADU anyway. It just seems like up to 800 square feet, that's not an unreasonable size. And so it'd be a relatively limited subset of ADUs where this would become a problem. I mean, it would have to be somebody proposing something bigger than 800 square feet under the circumstances stated. Similarly, with respect to the setback, again, something bigger than 800 square feet. Is it the case that we get a lot of folk who've expressed interest in ADUs greater than 800 square feet that would otherwise be impacted by this?
I can tell you that we get questions at the counter about establishing ADUs that become frustrated because of this requirement. I can't tell you if they're specific to 800 square feet or larger. They're usually at the.
I was going to say the prior requirement, was it tied to 800 square feet?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, so you might have had a lot of people coming in, maybe looking to do something more modest, perhaps. That perhaps were frustrated. I know I'm doing some speculating at this point, so I apologize for that. But I would not be uncomfortable with some of those things up there.
Okay, Commissioner Rubenstein?
Yeah, I'm questioning, like, what is the rationale for putting this language back in? Is it to limit ADUs in the city, or
I think my own view is to, at least in some situations, again, I myself think that something bigger than 800 square feet is pretty big. That's big enough to, and so what I'm looking for are opportunities to try to reconcile the desire to have ADUs, ADUs of reasonable size in reasonable settings, while at the same time being able to control, when we get something that's greater than 800 square feet, being able to have some sort of limitations on that. So.
How practical, the rear yard setbacks and open space requirements are not changed for an ADU, right, for a single-family home?
They have changed. They've been reduced down to 4 feet.
4 feet in your back, you can have a 4-foot backyard and put the ADU in the backyard?
Yes.
Oh, well. Because, yeah, okay. Because, I'm thinking, like, on most lots in Pacifica, small houses on small lots, there isn't that much opportunity for that type of size generally, unless you're, there's some, but not many. Maybe in some neighborhoods, but.
Okay.
Like, do I want to build?
All right, so I would like to add these back in terms of greater than 800 square feet. I'm personally in favor of that. It just makes sense to have just a modicum of control over what's happening in our town. And this is very minor amount of control. And if I remember right, we allowed ADUs up to 1,250, was it?
A detached ADU could be up to 1,200 square feet.
1,200 square feet, so.
Which is that's the size of my house in Valamar.
Very generous, so let's keep some control over what happens when somebody comes in and says 1,200 square foot ADU and our property's big enough for it. So we have some, it doesn't mean we're going to deny it, it just means that we have something to say.
Yeah, and if there were a property that had a reasonable, stance on maybe they have an 850 square foot lot and it's literally infeasible to widen the road to 26 feet, they could apply for an exemption, correct?
The standard is not available for relief from with a variance because it's tied to public safety. It's not a
So this isn't waivable, actually. If we make this determination, then if somebody comes in at 810 square feet and can't meet the 10-foot structural setback, they simply can't build. Or alternatively, they could say, you know what, we'll go to 790.
Right.
Yeah,
and,
that happens.
And build, and that people do that all the time.
And if it's less than 800, they can go to 4 feet to the property line, right?
correct.
So is 10 foot like an arbitrary number, or is that something that we think is the right setback, for a reasonable yard?
Well, I can speak to where it came from. It was in development of our 2017 ADU ordinance, which was the first significant revision in state law to limit local control over ADUs. The first one in some years anyways. And so when we were developing it, we were trying to the extent we could, apply typical primary unit zoning standards to accessory dwelling units. And so the thought process was, per our regular zoning standards, a 5-foot side setback on one property plus a 5-foot side setback on another property meant you were supposed to have 10 feet between dwelling units. And so that's where this requirement came from. It only ended up applying to detached ADUs, obviously, on the same site. It came to bear on all ADUs when applied to properties next to them.
So the setback is to the property line or to the adjacent building for the 10 foot?
To the building on the same site or an adjacent site.
Oh, okay. So in a typical backyard, you might have two backyards facing each other, and there's no, so you could go to 4 feet anyway, right?
Well, not with the 20-foot rear setback
Not with the,
requirement.
okay.
Is that able to be applied?
10 foot setback, right?
A greater than 800 square foot, yeah, it's for all.
Or is it just the height that regulates that?
It's you get a height bonus by moving it back.
Yeah, so to be clear, there would not be a 20-foot rear setback for the ADU, but you could get the 10-foot from an ADU that's over 800 square feet on one of the lots. Then there'd be a 10-foot separation at the very least.
So could I go to the property line then, if the adjacent house is, has a 30-foot yard?
No, there's a minimum 4-foot rear property line setback for all ADUs.
Okay.
Can you remind me what's the setback requirement in regards to a fire fence? Is it you could be up to as long as you're more than 3 feet away, or is it so basically if someone could build an ADU within 4 feet of their property line, which likely has a fence, are they going to be required to build a new 1-hour fire rated fence?
I don't know what building code requirements will be applied to them, but they'll have to meet building code.
And typically, there's no rating requirement for properties 3 feet or more off of the property line. Between 3 and 5 feet, there are limitations on the openings of the structure, typically 25% of that building surface. At 5 feet and beyond, there's no limitation.
So 4 feet's kind of gray.
4 feet would be subject to the 25% opening requirement, but not 1-hour rating requirements, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. I mean, in reading through the staff report, I did read through it with the understanding that we don't have much flexibility in a lot of it. I personally had a lot of concerns with the fact that a whole section of the fire requirement gets removed, and you don't have to bring your building up to certain current codes. I understand the hardship of, wanting to do a small ADU and then running into all the roadblocks of, now I need to bring the kitchen up to code, I need to do this, I need to do that. And it's concern. I am very pro ADU and housing. I think we need more housing, but especially in my profession, I think safety is huge. And so it's a bummer that we don't have a lot of control over what the state is requiring. So I am in favor of trying to take back the control we have. I mean, the 26-foot street width, I'm guessing, comes from fire requirement for outriggers, which your ADU may not be 30 feet tall or your property, in which case the outriggers, typically they don't need them, just from my experience. But I don't know, I think we're kind of all on the same page. I don't know if we want to start talking about what we really want to implement.
Does the 26-foot street width, if we put it in there, does it exclude streets in Pacifica? Like there's certain streets that are 25 feet and they would be excluded?
Yeah, we have some maps that were prepared for the last time this requirement was discussed. About 22.1% of all the streets in Pacifica are less than or equal to 26 feet in width. And so they would be affected by the addition of this.
I think it's important, though, to remember that those streets are geographically concentrated, and so to apply this standard, it would have the effect of prohibiting those larger ADUs in entire neighborhoods or large portions of neighborhoods, which has a geographic impact as well.
But it would only be prohibiting ADUs that are more than 800 square feet in size.
That's correct.
To be
Right.
super
I'm going
clear.
to guess it's a very limited pool of people in these specific areas that are going to get 800 square foot ADUs. Right?
And I guess, and to dovetail something someone else had asked, I mean, what was the purpose? What we were actually trying to accomplish? Was it actually so that we could get, firefighting equipment of a certain size in? Was it because we assumed there'd be more parking available because, there'd be two curbs on either side of the street? I mean, what was the underlying rationale for that requirement? If I could, maybe it's obvious, but I just want to refresh my recollection.
So I do just want to make a clarification because I think Commissioner Berman is newer to the commission. So I do want to clarify your comment that, like the fire requirements are being lifted, where that 26-foot requirement didn't come from the fire department to staff. It was out of a discussion with the planning commission deliberation. So it isn't such that like a fire code is being lifted by these state laws. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear for your discussion.
Okay, thank you.
It's a concerning statement to hear that.
It was scary to see from my end, but with the context, okay, got it.
But and some of the things we discussed, I'm looking at the map, like for example in Ballamar, where you've got the streets, we had a tragic instance a few years back where you couldn't get a fire truck back there because so many people were parked on both sides of the street, and it's 10 times worse now, and the person died, and that's just where this is all headed. We're going to pack these streets with cars and ADUs. The 26-foot roadway width has to stay, I think.
And just to be clear, this map shows streets in red that are, I think, less than 20 feet, and then the streets that are in the amber color are 20 to 25 feet in width, or less than 26, I should say, 20 to 25.9 feet.
So is this street, what's the street that's right by Pacifica there? That's here, right?
I think that's Beach Boulevard.
Oh, yeah, Beach Boulevard. Okay, so.
And just another observation, this is completely anecdotal and it doesn't apply to every street that's either in red or amber, but many of them are in areas where you may have custom lots or that are actually large enough to have perhaps an 800 or larger square foot ADU. And so, I mean, that might be relevant to your consideration as well.
Can I see the wide view of the map again, please?
Okay. Commissioner Campbell, you already spoken? Okay. Commissioner Big Stick, you want to speak again?
So, yeah, what was the width you said of the red ones? Was that 20 feet?
Less than 20 feet.
Less than 20 feet. Because I was looking at the red ones at first, and then you bring up the amber, so I'm wondering if we want to stick to less than 26, I get it, but maybe it would be more practical to pinpoint the less than 20 feet roads, because it's a lot more when you take into account less than 26. And again, I'm not committed to anything. I'm happy to vote along with whatever consensus is, but maybe it would ease it if we just focus on those 20-foot roads.
To maybe help that discussion, so the fire code in Appendix D sets forth the sizes of minimum fire access ways. And so 20 feet is the minimum width under the fire code for something that serves as the emergency vehicle access for a structure. The 26 feet came from the two additional standards where on-street parking becomes allowed. So at the minimum 20-foot width, no on-street parking is allowed under the fire code. 26 feet is the point at which one side of the street may be used for on-street parking. And then I think 32 feet is when both sides may be used for parking. So the rationale, as I recall, was that in instances where the city was prohibited from requiring off-street parking, those cars obviously would end up parking on the street, and we should not be intensifying the amount of on-street parking at the expense of public safety by further crowding the street where the fire code has indicated the street's not of adequate width. And so it was from a public safety standpoint and a standpoint of exacerbating already impacted on-street parking. That's my recollection of the commission's intent.
It's kind of what I remember too.
So I'm personally would be okay with the rear yard setback, but I think it's unfair to do the street width to a number of residents here who may want to do ADUs. So that's my opinion.
Yes, it's not that they can't do ADUs, they just couldn't do them larger than 800 square feet.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, I mean, maybe the point is larger lots can build larger ADUs, which can house a lower income family. I mean, I could see both sides. I personally am in favor with keeping, where we can, a wide road, especially in areas with more development, more population.
Well, I'm going to say that I would prefer to err on the side of safety for our community and limit the size of the ADUs on the 20-foot to 26-foot streets.
I think Commissioner Berman raised a really good point. I mean, what's the size at which it becomes practical to maybe house a low-income family in an ADU? I mean, I think part of what we've been struggling with a bit is sort of this notion of not wanting to effectively have sort of a subdivision where we've got two full-blown houses essentially on one lot. And there are a lot of houses, mine included, that frankly aren't that much bigger than 850 square feet, so, or 800 square feet or whatever it is we're talking about. So I don't know, I'm struggling a little bit with that. And I don't know if there's anything magical about where we've drawn the line is 800, maybe we say 900 or something, and maintain the same, and maintain the same restriction. Is that something that would be within our?
You just wouldn't be able to reduce it lower than 800.
Yeah. I also think on the map you can see most of the northern neighborhoods, like East Shore Park and Edgemar, are the most impacted, where Valimar and the Rockaway Beach are really not. There's just a few streets. So, you're talking about whole neighborhoods, really. That
it'd be hard to imagine a larger than 800 square foot ADU on a Sharp Park lot.
Right, well, that's the point. Like, they may not be able to qualify regardless of the street size. So, yeah. Well, yeah, and that's the whole point. Like, the street size may not just be the deciding factor on the size. It could be the other factors about the lot size itself. And for full disclosure, I live in Edgemar, so.
Okay.
Okay. Not seeing any more comments or what? Commissioner Niblin.
Well, I feel like I'd like to make a motion. I think that the text that we've gotten, again, I'm in favor of proposing it to the city council. Again, I kind of wanted, if I could, like to take a look again at the laundry list of additional sorts of kind of things that are within our discretion. And it looked to me like it really came down to sort of three things. I'm feeling like the 10-foot structure setback is something that I felt like there might be some coalescing around, and I would like to suggest a motion where we would include that optional regulation, apply a 10-foot structural setback for detached ADUs greater than 800 square feet. And then the following one, I think, was parking wherever it was. I guess that's just removing all parking requirements, which we're not proposing. So it's just the other, to go back to the prior slide then, and that was, just really trying to figure out what with ADUs greater than 800 square feet. I guess I'd be willing to make a motion that included both of those optional regulations.
Okay, we have a motion.
Well, and I can be a little more formal than that. I'd move that the Planning Commission finds the proposed ordinance as I've just sort of suggested it be modified by way of these two optional points on the slide that we've got up there, is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, adopts the resolution included as attachment A to the staff report to initiate the text amendment as amended, and recommend approval to the City Council and incorporates all maps and testimony into the record by reference.
Okay, we have a motion, and Commissioner Big Stick?
Before I second that, am I able to see the slide before this one? So are these options that we're considering also? Because as it currently is proposed, I don't think these two are in.
The optional black text is included in the proposed ordinance in front of you.
So the motion includes these two?
Yes.
Cool, in that case, I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. Okay, and that passes 6-1, and we'll be making a recommendation to City Council. We're good? All right, moving on to Commission communications.
Well,
Mr. Campbell?
just to the citizens of Pacifica, please pay attention to the re-emergence of Senate Bill 50, Scott Wiener's bill that would allow apartment buildings and things of that nature half-mile deep into our residential neighborhoods based on bus stops. So pay attention, because this one's coming, and really, it's really concerning. If these state laws upset you that we're discussing tonight, then what's coming is way worse. So pay attention.
Okay, Commissioner Big Stick?
Are there lots a mile away from buses where we can develop apartment buildings at this point? Just wondering. So I do have an actual comment, but before that I have a question, which is simply, is the next Planning Commission likely on the 6th of January?
So that was going to be part of my updates. That meeting will be canceled.
Very good, thank you. And the only other thing I have to report is that I think it was last weekend, Commissioner Berman and Niblin and I joined forces for the telethon at PCT Channel 26. And so I just wanted to say that you had your Planning Commission representing on behalf of PCT, and we had a good time doing it.
It was fun, yes.
It was fun.
Yeah. Commissioner Berman?
Speaking of bus stops, last week I attended a South San Mateo County Leadership Program seminar on transportation. And currently, Samtrans is doing a Reimagine Samtrans community outreach. So I know Samtrans did the pilot program in Pacifica for on-demand transportation, but right now Samtrans's planning department is really open to public comment, ideas, innovation. So if anyone has ideas on how to make public transit in Pacifica or throughout San Mateo County better, go to Samtrans's website, and it's called Reimagine Samtrans.
Thank you. I can't recall if I've already mentioned this. Was there a planning commission meeting after we were at the city council to talk about the appeal on the cannabis permit? If not, I mean, the appeal was denied. Can you remind me of the address?
1726 Palmetto.
Okay, well, the city council denied the appeal, so that permit stands.
Okay. And I'm making an announcement tonight, and that is I will be leaving the Planning Commission when they have the opportunity to do the reviews for new commissioners. I will stay until then, but I've decided I've done enough, thank you.
You've done it well.
So,
yes, indeed.
all right, and moving on to staff communications.
Sure, so I just wanted to announce, you probably may have seen that City Hall will have a holiday closure. So starting on Monday, the 23rd, through January 1st, reopening on Thursday, the 2nd. For non-regular holidays, so not on Christmas Eve, not on Christmas, and not on New Year's Day. However, all other days, we will continue inspections because construction doesn't stop, regardless, even if City Hall is closed. So we will continue that service. And if anyone out there is listening, or if Commissioner Clifford needs an inspection, the inspection hotline is 650-737-1000. So we will continue that service to the community during the closure.
Yay. Okay, and I guess we've now moved on to the final issue here. So who's gonna make the motion? Commissioner Big Stick.
I motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second? Commissioner Berman.
I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please vote. And that's unanimous.
Finally, something unanimous.
Has anybody ever dissented?